everybody. Hopefully your morning session, I'm sure, was amazing. Um, I want to welcome you all to the Future of Writing panel. We've got a wonderful lineup for you. I'm going to turn it over to Colin Hostin. He's going to be moderating the panel. He's the editorial director of Woodhall Press. He's also a writer and a teacher and a publisher and the chair of the Board of Ed and a great many things. So he's wonderful, and he's going to be leading the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I try to stay busy. Welcome everybody to this wonderful panel called "The Future of Writing." We're gonna figure it out together, what that future is going to look like. I'm going to first introduce our wonderful panelists. I'm going to bring them all up on screen, starting with the inimitable Jane Friedman, likely a very household name for many of us here. She's a publishing legend, and she's editor of The Hot Sheet. I'm also going to introduce Darian Sue. Hi, Darian. Who is an award-winning author, most recently a French bred, and the co-editor of Non-White and Woman, coming soon from Woodhall Press. Some of you were just in a panel, a workshop with Eugenia Kim. Hi, Eugenia. She is also an award-winning author of The Calligrapher's Daughter and Kinship of Secrets, one of my favorite MFA professors. And then I'm going to welcome Jeff Palicki. Jeff is the Vice President and Director of National Accounts at the Independent Publishers Group, IPG. And finally, last but never least, we have, just bringing up everybody here, Ashley Rennard, who is the disruptive author of Swing and co-host of Writer's Bridge. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We have this panel where we're going to get some very diverse perspectives on the future of writing, the future of publishing. I think I'm going to run it in a very sort of conversational and a discussion way. We're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves, but I also want to open it up to Q&A from the audience. I think a lot of people have, just ideas, thoughts, concerns, questions about what the future of publishing is going to look like. I think, when we think about where we are now in the world of publishing, it's kind of a pivotal moment, which I think is not saying a whole lot, because it feels like it's always a pivotal moment for publishing. I always think of course, Mark Twain's famous quote, "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." People have been talking about the death of publishing as long as really they've been publishing. And so, here we are yet again in another pivotal moment, right? We know there's a lot going on in the world. We've got this global Panera Bread. We've got, supply chains and all kinds of distribution schemes that are being disrupted. We know that the quote unquote mainstream publishing world is getting smaller and smaller as companies merge and acquire, and the big six becomes the big five, becomes the big four, then it'll just be one. And we know that the way that people consume media has changed dramatically over the last decade or so. Not just really when it comes to reading, but when it comes to movies, when it comes to television, there's way more competition for people's attention, right? It's people talk about how challenging things have been for the book industry, but frankly, I think people are worried in every media industry about how, what the future is going to look like. So today we're going to talk about what that might look like. I think that, in some ways, things may be looking challenging. I think in some other ways, people can see opportunities for writers and publishers. So we'll talk about all of it. And what I'm going to ask our panel to do, just to get us started, is before we get into the future, maybe I'm going to ask each of you to spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes just talking about how would you describe this current moment we are in when it comes to writing and publishing? What is your assessment of where publishing is right now August 2021. We could start with you, Jane.
Pressure's on. Okay, so I might tackle this from two different perspectives. From the traditional publishing perspective, let's say the New York commercial publishing perspective, as well as to some extent any sort of small press or independent press, there has literally never been a better time to be in publishing over the last 20 years, practically. Part of this is for tragic reasons because of the pandemic. So we've seen print sales up by 8% in 2020. They're up by roughly 15% this year. And all of the other formats too are up. Like there is barely a sector of publishing you can look at where sales are not increasing. So I think this has reassured a lot of people in publishing that it's not dead, that print is not dead, the book is not dead, reading is not dead. Quite the contrary, people return to books. They return to things that comforted them. They return to reading during very difficult times. And so far, that behavior appears to be sticking. So if you just want to look at the traditional perspective, which is a very small piece of the overall picture, it's doing wonderfully. Everyone is very bullish. Every Big Five publisher is acquiring more and publishing more than they were 2 years ago. So we have that piece. On the other side, we have, let's say, the perspective of the author. I think there's a lot of anxiety because there's so many more options or paths than there were before. And so you have this burden of choice where, what is it that you want to focus on? What do you want to do? Do you want the traditional? Do you want to have a more entrepreneurial approach? Do you want to self-publish? Do you want to take advantage of the creator economy, which I'm sure we can delve into if this audience wants to talk more about it, where you've got Substack and online literature sites and serialization tools like Kindle Vella. You've got Clubhouse and Discord. I mean, the options are just proliferating. And so some people feel very anxious about what should they do. I would say the first thing to remember is that you do not have to do all of it. It's about choosing what's going to fit your career, your writing, and also what's sustainable. Because in order to have a strong career, you have to be able to repeat small steps again and again. So I'll pause there and then let others try and tackle this very expansive topic.
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to say, simple question. Summarize publishing in 2 minutes. Thank you for starting us off, Jane. Other panelists, I can go to Daria next if you're okay with that. Where do you see publishing at this current moment?
I think that it's, I agree with everything Jane said. I agree with what Jane said. I really think that as somebody who's both a writer and an editor and also a micro publisher, that it is a really interesting time. I do think that writers are a little bit overwhelmed with how and where they should go. I think the exciting thing for me is that we are seeing more people coming to the table in terms of new voices, new writing. I think there's a lot of innovation happening, and I think that should be really encouraging. I think also we're seeing, in addition to the Big Five, the rise of small publishers and indie publishers in a way that we didn't before. And some of them are winning awards. I mean, it's not just a small sort of old school mom passion project. These are small publishers that really have a vision and they're really wanting to get their authors out there, like Woodhall. And I think that that's where there's a lot of opportunity. So I think that the burden does fall a little bit on the writer to do their homework and be like, okay, in addition to writing the best book I can write, what are the avenues that are open to me? What are my options? And I think staying really loose with that, because if your only objective is to be published, is to get an agent to be published by Big Five, I think that you're going to be limiting yourself because there are so many other avenues. And I think really understanding what those avenues are, like Jane said, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to know everything, but you have to kind of be a little bit more familiar with the terrain because the terrain is different.
Excellent, thank you. And thanks for the plug for Woodhall Press. We are certainly of the mind that this is a very exciting time to be a small press in publishing. So, I think we'll talk more about some of those options available to writers as this discussion grows and continues. But now I'd like to invite Eugenia to kind of give your perspective on where do you see things from your neck of the woods?
I agree with Jane and Darian, of course. Everything they said is sort of taking everything I wanted to say away. But I can add that I'm reading right now for the PEN/Faulkner Fiction Award. And what I'm seeing from writers and from publishers, we get a lot of small publishers, small presses as well, submitting their authors' work, is just an incredible variety. And so it's very exciting to see not just the variety in material and subject, in ethnicity, in age, but also in approach to story. So there's been experimental and some really wacky stuff that seems to work. So for authors, I think it's just an exceptional time, even though it's very difficult to break through and find the publisher that's right for you. It's about believing in your work, and then after that, looking for the place that your work might fit.
Thank you, Gina. I think that's a great point. And in some ways, it reminds me, we're almost hearkening back to a time when people were more wacky and unconventional before a lot of this industry got very commoditized. I'm not sure if there's anything left to be said, but I do want to give Jeff, anything that you might add from particularly a distribution standpoint?
Sure. First off, I'd like to say I agree with everything that's been said. It's quite an interesting time. Sales are up in the book industry. The number of titles being published are increasing month after month. The number of options to put those books out or to put your content out is increasing. And the number of outlets where, particularly a group like Independent Publishers Group and what I do, sell into various accounts, those outlets are increasing. So to me, it just seems like it's an ever-growing vast ocean of opportunity. You just have to know which way to paddle. And there's a couple things that have to be thought about in addition to the work that writers do to create their material. You have to think about, how is your book going to get found in this vast ocean? Who are your people? What are your communities? How do you get people to help you, and how can you help others to succeed? And then lately, what kind of partnerships, whether it's with Woodhall, whether it's IPG, whether it's with other writers, you've got to work together.
Absolutely. I think especially at Woodhall, we've seen how it takes a real team effort to create success stories. It's not just the publisher doing all the work. And our resident disruptor, Ashley, what do you think about where we are right now?
So I am very new to publishing. In 2019, I left decades of a career, decades long in figure skating, to focus on my writing. And like Darian said, originally I wanted to do everything the right way. Like, I'm a very, very good rule follower. A year after I started my memoir, I was signed with an agent after multiple offers, and I was completely underwhelmed with the experience. And now I'm really digging into, what if we look at an author's influence and their ability to connect with their readers directly as not something people do when they are trying to just rack up social media followers, or something that people do when they are bloggers? What if we look at our ability to influence as a savvy understanding and implementation of what we know about human psychology? And who better to do that than writers?
It's a great point. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also a great segue. So thank you for kind of offering your perspective on where we are now. One of the things that I think is interesting is we often talk about the future of publishing, and not always about how that relates to really what the title of this panel is, the future of writing. Okay, and they're not always one and the same. And so because we have a really sort of engaged audience of writers, each in different stages of their careers, this is an open question to any and all panelists who would like to weigh in. When we think about the way that writing happens, that creative process, and each of you engage in it in different ways, Has anything changed fundamentally? Because as we think about how publishing has evolved in the 21st century, has it really affected the creative process? Should it?
I might jump in first on that because I actually have like something very specific that I've noticed change since I entered the industry in the mid 90s. When I was a creative writing student, the mythology was, you isolated yourself in your garret and you produced your work of genius, and then you came back to the world and, bestowed it on your editor or agent or on your adoring public. And then once, you got the accolades, you went back to your garret and wrote again in private. I think that model is, I'm not going to say it's gone, but what I see are young writers who aren't so interested in that isolation, and they're more encouraged by trying things out in places like Wattpad or Substack or on social media, serializing their work, improving as they go, rather than toiling alone in private. And I actually think it's for me, it feels like a more supportive and encouraging environment. Of course, it depends on what platform you're working on. Wattpad, for example, is a very encouraging, positive environment for a new writer to kind of grow up in. Writers trying their hand at things like fan fiction to get their bearings, and then using that as a stepping stone to other types of work. So that's one phenomenon that I think has definitely shifted just how writers come into their own. I think digital media has obviously changed that.
And to piggyback on Jane there, what I am finding is that we have so many opportunities to check out our comp authors every single day on social media. And I talk about them as like comp accounts. How are they interacting with their audience? And what do we see there? What gaps do we see in what their audience is asking for, or the audience is curious about that author is not able to provide for them? And for me, that was really reassuring that not every memoir had ever been written, and that I maybe did have a book and a story to tell. And that's how I help my coaching clients now too, is to really take a look at those comp accounts and get active in the comment threads, wherever that person is active. Whether it's Twitter, whether you subscribe to their newsletter, or you have notifications on Instagram, to really see what their audience is responding to. And you're going to start to notice where the gaps are and where that person is not serving what that audience needs completely, because of course no one can, and how that intersects with your interest and your unique experience.
Awesome. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to hear the themes of how technology has helped, seeped into that creative process, right? Kind of bringing people together in ways that really have not been traditionally, kind of taught in writing programs. But also using technology as a way to interact with readers that, Harper Lee didn't have, right? She didn't want any anyway. But, we get to see that interaction with our own favorite authors, as where it's actually said with other authors, and we can kind of see how those interactions are going, and how they might be able to inform our own creative processes.
I am still in the isolated author mythology, and I find that these are really exciting platforms, but they're also really daunting for my process. But I have noticed after my first book was published, writing the second book was so much more difficult, because then there were expectations on me. And so if you're writing a first book, enjoy the freedom that you have of not knowing, what to expect. And just being devoted to the work, because that's a really rare position to be in. So now that I'm writing my third book, it's even worse. It's even worse. And for the first time, I actually plotted a novel, and I don't know if that's successful or not, but I felt the pressure to do that because of the experiences that I've had with publishing. So
I think it's a great point, Eugenia. I think folks have long said that it's sometimes harder to publish a second book than a first because of those kinds of expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a thought on this too. So I think, and it's not really pandemic related so much as just career and where writing and publishing and readers are right now. But my background is, I have 5 novels with Penguin Random House. So I thought I was on that fiction track, sort of, as Jane was saying, this idea that, once we're kind of in our box, the publisher agent is very reluctant to have you go to another genre, or this is before, or do anything like that, because, you have your base, you've got your audience and so on. When I had, after my 5th book, it was clear that for lots of different typical publishing things we can get into another time, things were trending down and that sort of thing. And so I ended up doing a pivot, well, I was depressed for about 2 to 3 years. And then I went into a pivot where I started doing more, nonfiction work, mostly, material that was coming out of the workshops I was leading. And then I wrote a book there. And at that point, I went to a small publisher and I wasn't as worried. At that point, I thought, well, you know what, I may as well just go ahead and do this thing. I have this knowledge, I have this interest, I have this content that's really good. And yes, it's different from, my readership isn't going to be interested, but it felt valuable to me. And I love what Eugenia said about devotion. I like that's such an important part to helping you stay the course as a writer, as we go through these times that keep changing. And then from there, about 4 years after that, I ended up, believe it or not, getting an MFA at 50, even though I'm already published. And I pivoted into poetry and won a poetry award. And so I guess where I am now, and that was not something that was happening 10 years ago. I mean, you could not jump around without feeling some kind of backlash, either from readers or from your publisher. And now I think the bottom line is, if you are drawn to create and you build some expertise in those creations, if it works, it works. And so I think there's just more opportunity for writers to really have, I think, a bigger playing field and creatively than there was before. And so I'm really excited about that. It's been great for me, but something that really 10 years ago was really off the table.
What a great point there. And I think, in some ways, it echoes what Jane was saying, is that we have like sort of new opportunities opening up for creators, who can now get around some of those conventional gatekeeping roles in ways that were really not possible 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I just want to say a couple things. One, I see that our chat is already very vibrant, so please, I'm just going to encourage people, if you have a comment or a question, you can put it in the chat. I am going to open it up to Q&A in a few minutes, and we may use the chat to draw some questions from, so please feel free to drop them in there. I want to just pick up on something that both Darian and Eugenia brought up, and I really appreciate those diverse perspectives. Our keynote speaker this morning, Gina, said she makes notes constantly. She's always making notes, right? You got to write things down because, of course, we all forget. And she's, I guess, what people might call old school, right? She's writing them down on the back of receipts, and she's got a whole folder of loose papers. We talked a little bit about the role of technology in the creative process and the future of writing. I just want to open up to the panel to talk about, how, either from a personal standpoint or more generally, do you see the role of technology creeping into that creative process?
Thanks, Colin. So jumping on what Eugenia said, and then also the question in the chat. So writing my first book, I had no pressure except what I put on myself, but I needed a massive amount of encouragement. So interacting with my audience through direct messages was a way for me to get that encouragement, that the little bits that I was sharing were resonating with people, and also for me to hone what else people wanted to know about relationships, about really digging yourself out from a hard part in your marriage. So that ability to connect with so many people, I have an average of 80 conversations going in my direct messages a day. And that may seem like mind blowing, but I do need that. I do need that confirmation that yes, I should keep sharing with people. And also, it's almost like every DM response back is like a mini draft for how I would say something or communicate with someone. And I can see how that lands. It's like doing stand up all day almost. You know, you see in real time how your message is landing with people. And then, you know, when you go to that 79th DM of the day, you can say it in a better way that's more concise. So technology allows for massive amounts of practice on a daily basis with interacting with a lot of different people.
Yeah, it's like doing the matinee show and then doing the evening show. That right, you correct your your mistakes, as it were. Yeah, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience to Ashley. Although it's not typically in social media DMs, it tends to happen over email or in blog comments or Facebook comments, perhaps. I'm now experimenting with Discord. Usually at this point, I can hear some writers I know saying, oh my goodness, I could not handle all of that interaction on social media. It can scare people. So I just wanted to maybe offer reassurance that once you get the message from readers, you can hang up the phone. You know, like it's not a 24/7 thing that you're going to be doing for the rest of your career or life. Or like, I think there are different periods that you go through where you're learning and soaking things up. And there are times when you do turn things off and digest and then refill the well. Because of course, communicating with people on social media and learning from your readers can be emotionally draining, depending on your personality. So I just want to offer some, I guess, the reassurance that you're allowed to step away once you've learned what you need to. But I do think that engagement with the readership is something that poses an opportunity because it gives you more power to build your career over time that's not dependent on a publisher or an agent or someone else doing the work for you. But it, of course, also presents this burden of having, you know, that the publisher isn't going to, you know, take care of all this for you. So I think that's always the struggle for writers, is finding the balance of being able to have that artistic voice and to be able to conserve their energy for the expression, and then being able to engage on the other side of it.
I know that's probably my biggest challenge is finding that balance, Jane, between, you know, sort of engaging with the world, but also focusing on the work. And, you know, you have to find, I think, time for both these days. So yeah. I'm going to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Darren.
No, I wanted to just say, I also think it really, I agree with both what Ashley and Jane said. I really do think, though, it really depends on your genre. I think that if you're a fiction writer, I think the engagement with the audience is really different than the engagement you have if you're writing nonfiction, or even creative nonfiction, which would be like memoir or something like that. You know, I know that as a novelist, my engagement with my readers is really different from almost platform building kind of work I have to do as a nonfiction writer. And so I'm in different spaces in a different way for those titles, you know, than I am with my creative work on the fiction side. So I do think that the genre you're in too is going to have an impact on what kind of presence you want in terms of social media and also in terms of engagement. I know that honestly, when I'm working on a novel, I really just don't engage other than, you know, responding to book clubs and other people who are really awesome about my past novels. But it's pretty much a one-woman show when it comes to that. But when it comes to my nonfiction work, I do whatever I can to be really engaged and really supportive and start those conversations and be in places where my readers are, because they're looking for, you know, information and support. So I do think that the genre will make a difference, and you'll also find your own sweet spot with it. So I also think that writers should just do what feels like it's a little bit in their wheelhouse and maybe go a little bit outside their comfort zone. But, you know, you don't have to stress yourself out over it.
I think that's a fantastic point. Absolutely. One of my favorite things recently was when we had, her name is escaping right now, the inauguration poet, who sort of really blew up and went viral. And we had all these really great social media conversations about poetry, which was really wonderful. So I'm going to start reading some of the questions we have in the chat. I also want to invite you, if you want to use the raise hand feature and you want to ask your own question, we can highlight you. And we have some really good questions, but one thing I just want to throw out to the panel before we do that is we're here talking about the future of writing and how that is corresponds to the future of publishing, which is always seems to be in flux. And one of the things that many writers say is that one of the challenges they face is kind of navigating the world of publishing, right? So much of it seems so arcane if you're not on the inside and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this world of publishing. So I'll throw it out to any panelist who wants to weigh in. But what would you say, and there's probably a lot we can say about this, is the most important thing that people who are writing today need to know about publishing, or about maybe the future of publishing? What's the one thing that you wish every writer knew as they were getting ready to share their stories and try to navigate the path of finding their readers? Is there something that you think is particularly important?
Well, Colin, I spent my first year in publishing lonely and feeling completely uninformed. Like I was an expert in my former profession, and I thought I'm never going to know anything or have any friends. And this is why I need an agent to unlock the world of writer friends for me. So there are two things I do every day like I said, I need reminders often. The one thing is the comp accounts, to remind myself, okay, these other writers who are, and I write commercial memoir, these other writers who are selling millions of copies are still not meeting the needs of their whole audience. And the second thing is I act like I already have the thing that I'm looking for. Like the way I wrote my manuscript that actually got me agent offers was I wrote on my calendar, manuscript due to Whitney Frick, editor of Woodhall Press, February 1st.
It's not a Zoom call unless you have dogs barking in the background. So. So yeah, no, Ashley, I think just to kind of pick up on what you were saying there, I think the importance of finding community as writers, go back to that theme of so much of what we do kind of happens in isolation. So finding a community is a great step in trying to navigate the world of publishing. And of course, kind of using technology to kind of see what others are doing and yeah, have some swag.
I'd like to add that it's just for writers who are trying to enter and get their work published, that it's a completely different side of writing. It's just almost a foreign country. It's because suddenly it's not about the art, it's about marketing and selling. And so that can be really foreign and difficult for writers who have been, isolating and just immersed in their creative process. And so it can be very jarring, and it's important to know that it's going to be really different and difficult in a different way than you've been, toiling so far.
Yeah, it's all about sell. Go ahead,
yeah, to build on that, I would say, as someone who worked inside a traditional publishing house for many years, the people who are reviewing your work, whether it's an agent or an editor, this is their job. And so there's when they do it day after day for hundreds and thousands of hours, there's a certain amount of detachment and also dismissiveness that comes into it. They cannot like have a huge emotional investment in every project or every submission. And of course, this is soul crushing for a writer or author to experience that kind of, it's just a business, don't take it personally, go away now. You know, certainly there are editors and agents who are very, they're very nurturing and supportive when they say no, thank you. And then there are others who just send a form rejection. But I just want to emphasize that the more you cannot, it's going to hurt, but the more you cannot take it personally and just move on to the next opportunity or chance, you know, the better off you're going to be. I'm not saying it's easy and you have to find your own way to deal with that psychological demon that comes out of the series of rejections you're likely to receive. But finding whatever it is that works for you to move through it, I think is key for longevity.
If I could jump in
Please,
here,
Jeff.
I have to say I could completely agree with what Jane was saying there. It's really easy to, when you're inside the industry, to see here's another one, here's another one. And what really shines to me is when an author, a publisher, a project comes to me, is when I can feel that passion for sharing their story. So I think you have to pivot from the passion of writing your story to sharing that story. And how do you are your best champion for your work. Each person you talk to is somebody that you have to convince to be part of your team. And it starts with your friends, it starts with your family, it starts with your associates, then your community, and then to the publisher as well. It's a daunting task, but it's one that will reap the rewards, and you will find your people. We're all here today because we found our people. And don't give up on yourself, but keep following your passion.
Thanks, Jeff. That really resonates. I think, you know, especially as Jane said, it's a long game. It's a long, you know, longevity is the key here. So we can't get too caught up in the short-term ups and downs. So excellent. We have a fantastic conversation going on in the chat. I'm going to bring some of it into our panel here. Oh, Sarah, I was just going to read your question, but I see your hand. So why don't I just ask you to ask it?
Yeah, in the chat, I was talking about how, oh, I'm on the screen. Hi. In the chat, I was talking about how I personally struggle with that, you know, private idea of, you know, like sitting down with my notebooks and like, you know, doing all that. And then having social media outlet. I mean, like I read a lot of like, you know, reviews and how I personally like relate to things on my personal Facebook. But there are so many things I write and then I delete because I'm like, I'm oversharing. No one wants to hear this, you know, kind of thing. If I save it all for my poetry drafts and my poetry, and eventually, you know, whatever journal decides to take one poem, or like, you know, if I have a book one day, they want to read it, they can read it. I'm not going to force it on anyone. But then I, you know, of course, then, you know, why do I bother? So my biggest question is, especially with like sensitive content, like, you know, even in this era where there are so many think pieces and people are like, you know, completely putting their soul, even on Twitter or Facebook, or like, you know, a lot of different outlets. What is our responsibility as a writer or a poet to put our autobiographical selves in our work, to be like, I have an authority to write this thing about, you know, violence against women because I am a survivor of that, or something like that. Like that's like a personal thing. You know, what is our responsibility online or on the page, or, you know, if there is a responsibility at all, to find that specific audience, or to let it find other people? You know what I mean? That was like a long-winded thing, but, you know, loaded question.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'll just open it up to the entire, yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
I have it, Sarah, when you hit publish on something, even if you delete it right after, that is a draft. that is a draft on that caption, that is a draft on that tweet. Once you put it out into the world, you have a different feeling about it. And you would say, oh, I would change that line. I would say this, I would clarify this or that. So it's okay. I would encourage you to let it live a little longer online, so then you see the responses from people, because that can really inform how you would broaden that, how you would tell that in a longer format. I think that we all have the permission to share our stories because we want to be damn writers, right? So getting that out and seeing how it feels, I think, can fast track our writing, because it no longer just lives on our computer or in a notebook. It's actually bouncing around in the world, and we're getting to see people's responses to it.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Sarah. So moving on, I see a couple hands. I'm just going to bring in one question from the chat and then come back to questions from the audience. I'm going to read this one from Donna Mascolta, who says, I'm the author of 3 books of fiction, each from small presses, but for my next book, I'd like to aim for a large publisher. Will my publishing history mark me as a small press author and hinder interest from a large publisher? I think it's a very pertinent question, as we see both the conglomeration of publishing on the large scale and also the proliferation of smaller presses. So I'm going to throw that out to the panel and see if anybody has a perspective on that.
I have a perspective. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
No, you go, Darian. Please go ahead, because you've seen all sides of this.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that actually one thing that we're starting to see is that some of the authors who launched with small presses, I mean, ambitious small presses that really did get behind their authors, and the authors themselves kind of got themselves out there. Maggie Smith comes to mind, you know, she's a poet, are actually getting picked up for bigger deals with larger houses, and vice versa. So I don't think it's like before, where you know, there was a bigger stigma on self-publishing or hybrid publishing or indie publishing. And once you go down, you can't go back up. I think it is going to depend on the book and the project. So I do think it has to be really relevant in the marketplace. And I'm so sorry to say it like that, but if you're going to look at Big Five, that's, I think, a reality for any writer who's trying to figure out how to get their work out into the world. You know, what I tell people is that it just basically has to work. So if you have a book that's really in the right place with a small publisher, an indie publisher, and then your next book or novel or memoir is a different kind of book and is something that is a good fit with the Big Five publisher. If they see that, they're going to take it. They're not going to be like, oh, she was, you know, she did that project and it didn't take off. It's going to really, they're going to look at the merit of the book. And I think that's also something that's, I think, actually a little bit new, believe it or not. I think if, like, again, years ago, even if you had a really good title, if your quote unquote sales numbers were down and you were indie published, it would be a little bit harder. Now they are going to look at reach. They're going to look at the quality of the work. They're going to look at ultimately what they think it's going to bring to their house. But I think you can go up and down, is what I'm saying, in a way that we couldn't before. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you know, in some ways that world of small versus large publishers flattened a lot. You know, it doesn't, you know, throwing a huge marketing budget behind a book does not guarantee that it's going to sell anymore, if it ever did. Stephanie, I see your hand, and I know you wrote a question in the chat about the fact that it seems like every other book right now is a political book. I'm going to just invite you to address the panel.
You know, thank you for taking my question. I really appreciate this. I just want to preface that I am a political junkie. I like seeing all these books, but there seems to be a huge amount of them. And plus, the New York Times just had a story the other day about conservatives are seeing a boom in conservative political books. So it's like, I was curious if you could comment on the polarization in publishing. Is that reflecting what's going in society? But also the business model for these political books. I love hearing about them. I almost never buy them because the people on TV tell me everything I want to know on it. The books come and go very quickly. You know, Michael Wolff writes a book, then he writes another book, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious about the model of that. Is this helping the publishing industry? Is it sucking out money from people who might not have the latest revelation about Trump or Biden, but might have a more interesting take on a political or social issue. So I was curious to see your reactions to that.
I guess I'm the most natural person to tackle this first, since I keep tabs on this. Absolutely, what you're seeing right now in book publishing with the conservative houses and a lot of the cultural weight attached to authors signing with particular publishers now, all of that is reflective of the polarization in the US and elsewhere. No question about it. I have how to put it? I look at this perspective of just a very kind of neutral business angle, which is these books have been selling better than they ever have since roughly 2016, and we all know what happened that year. There has been a slowdown in sales since Biden took office because he's not as exciting. There are still more books to come because of January 6th. So I think there's a really big one about to come out from, oh gosh, is it Bob Woodward in September? I think right now the conservative titles seem to be doing a little bit better because there's like the current backlash that's happening with the anti-racism titles that skyrocketed up the list over the last year or two. And those social justice, I should also mention social justice books, anti-racism books, all of those are also doing well. And some people lump them in with political books, but it's a bit of a different category. In any event, I think the activity is generally healthy. I don't think it might be sucking some of the air out of the room for some types of media attention, but I think it's more about the news cycle and less about, not paying attention to books. It's what's happening in the headline. Like right now, it's Afghanistan. So these sorts of events, I think, make things difficult for publishers, just like 9/11 made things difficult for anyone coming out with a book during that time. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I'm not concerned. It's something. Political books are always going to be part of the landscape. Some of them aren't going to sell at all, and some are going to do remarkably well. It's always been that way.
Seems like it always will be. Thanks, Jane. Jeff, did you have a perception on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment there too that it's a very cyclical business, the political books. When I started in my career as a bookseller back in the early 90s, I saw the rise of Rush Limbaugh immediately after the election of Bill Clinton. So, it's sort of, there's a give and take there. The thing that strikes me here is that the best part about the discussion about political books is that we're talking about books, that mainstream media is talking about books, and the fact that books still have a place in all of our lives. And there's plenty of room. At the same time that American Marxism is selling off the charts, there's still dozens of poetry books that are selling like they've never sold before. That's just fantastic. So I wouldn't get discouraged by the fact that there are these books that seem to be sucking the air out of the room, because they're not. They're bringing as much air into the room as they are consuming.
And I just wanted to add one more little quick note, is that people are confused. People do not know what to make of what's happening. And these books help explain it from all perspectives. And yes, some of it's just confirming what you want to believe, but there are people who are looking for books wanting to better understand why we're living in this very polarized time. So I think we're going to see that books being published also for that reason, and it's a very good reason.
Yeah, great perspectives. I think, in my experience, publishing has long been a slave to trends. Whatever's trending, everybody wants to ride that wave. And the question is, how much longer, will people want to read vampire books or, political books or whatever the newest trend is? And so great question and great answers. Thank you. I see a hand from my CEO, Dave Leger himself. Dave, do you have something you want to add to this? I know you have great perspectives, good questions.
This is for everybody. But Jane, you said something specifically about it's not people say it's not personal, it's business. And that struck me, having been in publishing for a while, and from both sides. Woodhall Press is a smaller press. We've got 35 titles this year, so we're still very personal, right? We pre-COVID, we'd sign our contracts over dinner usually, and a lot of our authors were in New England. But prior to that, I've worked for larger presses. And I had this discussion with someone else the other day because they were acting, I would say, slightly unprofessional, like it was very dramatic experience. And I was caught because I was having a moment where I was saying, is it the business or is it the personal? And I'm curious, for all your parts, how do you balance it's just business versus these are people's lives on the line? Every book that you work on, it's a person's life that they put into this, yet it is a business, right? So how do you balance that it's just business? Because I think I'm still grappling with that, and all these years later, and I don't really have an answer.
Yeah, the personal and the professional. Any words of advice for our audience?
As a total rookie, I think you have no business unless you are impacting people personally. So as writers, we have to focus on the personal, and we have to focus on that connection that we have with our readers, whether we actually go back and forth with them in direct messages every day, or we just know that our stories, fiction or nonfiction, are touching people and really changing the way they think about the world or giving them comfort in the way they look at their lives. The more connection we have personally, the more clout we have in making sure business decisions go our way.
I'll say that there's a way to run a business that's humane. Sometimes we have cartoon caricatures of business people in our head, or what businesses do, like it's just ruthless capitalism and Scrooge McDuck, swimming through coins. That doesn't describe, how most publishers approach their work, or editors or agents. Most are in the business because they care very deeply about books and reading or literature and art. And they're able to hold in their minds at the same time, some of the conflicting demands of art and business. I think it helps to have transparency in conversations about why certain decisions get made, to the extent that you're able to offer that transparency, to show the numbers or the P&L statements or the specific reasons why you came to a certain decision, or why you can't have that special matte lamb on the cover because it would make the book unprofitable, or it would lead to more returns or scuffs, or there's so many decision points in publishing that remain very opaque to writers or authors because the publisher hasn't taken the time to explain it. And sometimes it's because we don't treat authors like mature adults, like they can handle the explanation or the reasoning process. I think they can be trusted to know what goes into these decisions. So if we can talk with them honestly and sincerely, I think authors respond to that well.
And Jane, on the other side of that too, from the author's point of view, and to Ashley's point, it's being personal with every person you connect with, because that's how you build your brand up. But how do you balance it is kind of where I'm thinking, because I try to connect with every person, and it can be very time consuming. I mean, you could spend hours crafting one email for one person and you've got hundreds. So I'm always kind of curious at what point we find the division. I guess we have to find that ourselves, really. But I'm just curious if you have any tips for anybody in the audience listening as they're building their brand out and trying to maintain that level of personal connection, but also professional, where, if somebody contacts you on LinkedIn and says, hey, I just want a quick hour and a half of your time, and you don't know this person, they just kind of reach out to you and expect your time next Tuesday at 2:00. But you want to be kind at the same time. So it's sort of this balancing act, I think.
I think it helps to have a schedule, if you have so that if you devote your entire evening to writing, and then, the daytime hours to marketing and promotion and reaching out to your audience, because there's such separate processes, for me anyway, that to have a clear definition about these are the hours devoted to art, and then these are the hours devoted to everything else around that art. I think that's helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely keep it scheduled when it comes to email, because I think email can eat up 24 of your hours a day if you let it very easily. It seems almost unfair that we should run out of time because we're having such a vibrant conversation. But as Rebecca just reminded us in the chat, we just have about 5 minutes left. And I wanted to just give just a quick outro question. In the spirit of one of my favorite radio shows, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, sometimes they end with, give us a prediction, right? So we're talking about the future of writing. And I'm gonna offer each of the panelists an opportunity to just give me one sentence, one prediction of where you think the future of writing is going. Go crazy, get creative, like nobody knows. That's the fun part. So as we leave with these really, really interesting perspectives and thoughts about how the industry is changing and how that has impacted the way that we create, the way that we tell our stories, the way that we sell our stories. What is your one prediction for the future of writing? And I'll go in reverse order this time. I'm gonna start with you, Ashley.
Okay, so total rookie here. I think innovation is going to be key. Innovation in how we deliver, how we connect. I think that writers who are able to say, here's my audience, let me tell you what they care about. I think that is one of the greatest skill sets that's going to carry us forward as this economy keeps shifting and changing.
Absolutely. So we'll continue to innovate. Jeff, your prediction.
Boy, this is a tough one.
Save the best for last.
I'm trying to keep it focused more on writing than on the business of where writing goes. But I do think it'll continue to get easier to connect with everyone along the path, whether it's, and one thing I would note is that I don't think the physical world of bookstores is actually going to leave anytime soon. I think we're going to see a resurgence. I'm seeing a little bit of it now. There's more independent bookshops opening than we've seen in some time. And it's amazing to me that there's people who have the confidence and the passion to open a bookstore in the midst of a pandemic, and yet they're doing it. And that's because they want to share what many of you have done and written with people that they know in their community. And the community seem to be responding. The buy local movement is tremendous. And I think it's something that from an author or writer perspective, I think it's important to keep yourself in that ecosystem.
Absolutely. So we have greater connections, and also our bookstores will continue to be very important part of this process. Eugenia, your prediction for the future of publishing and writing?
In the future of writing, I think it's just going to get more crowded, that there's going to be even more writers. And so it's as a result of that, I think it's just so important to really believe in your work and to make it the best it can possibly be by any method necessary that works for you.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing that there's more and more people telling their stories. It creates greater competition, but we have to believe in ourselves. Absolutely. Darian, your prediction for the future of writing and publishing?
I would say for writing, and this is what I tell all of my clients and writers, is that I think your only real job is to pay attention. So as a writer, if you're paying attention to your own passions, you're paying attention to what's happening in the world, you're paying attention to where you are emotionally with things, that's going to make a really big difference. I can't talk about writing without talking about publishing, because I don't think anybody really wants to write in a vacuum. I think everybody has that desire to be published. And so from that perspective, I'm going to say, I think preparedness and curiosity are the two things that are going to keep you going through this, because if you're not curious, you're going to burn out. So you should be like, wow, I didn't know they were going to do that. That's really interesting to me. I'm going to pursue that. And the preparedness, because you just, like getting a job, you just have to know what is happening out there. So those are my two pieces.
Also excellent advice. Be prepared, be informed, right? Excellent. And Jane, you'll round us out.
So there is going to be a lot of burnout. It is getting more crowded. it will always be crowded. It's always going to feel crowded, but there are also going to be a lot of people dropping out because some people will just get exhausted. So, look around you. It's one of those situations where the person on your left and the person on your right may not be here in 10 years, which can sometimes be a discouraging message, but pace yourself. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think there are so many tools and options now that some people they're going to go at 200 or 300%, and then they're not going to be able to stay in the race.
Well, I think it's a perfect note to end this panel on. I think, we're talking about the future of writing. We have to understand that future is long, big, and vast, and we can't get too caught up in the minutia of day to day, month to month, or even year to year. So I want to thank, first of all, our panelists for a really, really vibrant discussion. I think we got very varied perspectives. And I think leaving on a positive note, right? When we talk about the future of writing, there's often the impetus to sort of go to doom and gloom, but clearly we are seeing a lot of opportunities for ourselves as writers and creators. I want to thank the audience for being so engaged, asking wonderful questions, really kind of thinking about what we know and what we need to know and how do we get there. And I'm going to introduce again our conference director, Rebecca, to kind of shepherd us into the next part of what has already been a very engaging day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, panelists. That was so informative, so much wonderful advice, and I'm processing all the information. I feel a little bit like the hall monitor here. We're having so much fun, and I'm like, okay, done, we're over. Let's move on to the next thing. I'm sorry. I feel like we could definitely spend a lot more time with all of your wonderful questions and all of your insights. So thank you, everyone, so much for being here. It is time to move on to the next thing. We're going to actually break for lunch for the next hour. So from 12 to 1 for our full conference attendees. You can come back at 1 o'clock. You can use the same link that you used for the morning session. Come back in. We'll do an hour of guided networking where we'll have the opportunity to meet some of the other people who are in attendance. I know it seems like it could be a little challenging to do with since we're virtual, but we're still going to try to give you that experience where you can connect with each other as well as our team. And then at 2 o'clock, we'll have the workshop, the afternoon workshops with your instructors. And then for those of you who are just attending the panels and the keynotes, you can leave the chat. You'll just use the afternoon link that you received to come in for the 3 o'clock book pitch.